Welcome everyone to a special Signal conversation. Today we're going to be exploring the future of commerce with Andrew Bax. He is founder and chief innovation strategist at Pilot44. So welcome, Andrew.
Thanks for having me.
No, it's great. Thank you. Thank you for agreeing to come and have a conversation with us. So I think we'll like to start by just hearing a little bit about you. And maybe you could just sort of walk us through just briefly about kind of the work you guys are doing over at Pilot44.
Sounds good. As mentioned, I'm Andrew Bax, founder of Pilot44. Before starting Pilot44 8 years ago, I actually spent a decade at Procter & Gamble. So spent a number of years in P&G in a variety of roles. Most of them were innovation focused. Actually, probably most relevant to this conversation was the back half of my career with P&G, which was based in Silicon Valley, helping P&G tap into the emerging technology and startup ecosystem, leveraging open innovation practices and so forth. So spent a number of years building that up while carrying the P&G badge. And towards the end of that time, I felt the draw to start a company. Being Silicon Valley, it's hard to avoid. But I was living through essentially the problem that Pilot44 ultimately aims to solve, which was helping corporates actually activate innovation in market, get it in front of consumers, add value, and hopefully build the business. And so we've been building Pilot44 for just over 8 years, and we've earned the reputation as a trusted corporate innovation and venture building studio. Our goal is really to help large corporations, as I mentioned, accelerate digital and growth innovation.
And so now you're sort of, not fully, but sort of semi back in the fold with P&G, and you're doing some work with them on the future of commerce. So I think what we really want to talk about a little bit today is sort of what you guys have sort of uncovered around commerce. Maybe we could just sort of touch right now just on some of the highlights of where you see commerce is going to be shaped going into the future. Basically, how will consumers shop, or how, I guess, will consumers expect to be able to shop in the future?
Yeah, it's a great question, and I don't want to pretend to have the crystal ball. A lot of the work we're doing right now, and now we'll talk about in this conversation, is related to scenarios. And the beauty of scenarios is it starts to outline potential pathways. But underlying, before we get into the scenarios, underlying that work is, some predictions that a lot of the experts we spoke to, our team, myself, start to kind of coalesce around. A few of the big ones are, sustainability is going to increasingly drive innovation in purchase decisions, whether it's at shelf or online. Demographics are going to shift, and those demographic changes are going to impact shopping behaviors dramatically. The first generation of digital natives, i.e. the Gen Z, is already shaping the future of commerce today. We'll talk through some examples, I'm sure, throughout this conversation, but their focus on authenticity and in the moment commerce, whether it's shoppable content or things like live stream shopping, it's being embraced already. So the future does feel now. A few other things that we're watching as related to this work, it's, digital commerce is going to continue to accelerate. Technologies like 5G and high-speed mobile internet is going to unlock new experiences, everything from AR, VR to to highly sort of high power experiences, high value add experiences. One thing that's worth mentioning is that retail is not dead at all. The sort of pure play of just offline only brick and mortar retail feels like a thing of the past, but the role of the store and omni-channel shopping is alive and well. It's just changing, right? And so I think it's up to brands and retailers, for that matter, to start to adapt how commerce is transacted.
Can you kind of walk me through a little bit about how you, like the methodology, like how you guys sort of like built these together,
Sure.
built the scenarios?
The first stage of this work is really looking at macro driving forces. There's this acronym called STEEP. It's like social, technology, economic, environmental, political. These are forces that are going to be dominating the sort of world over the next few years, or maybe up to 10 years out. So looking at those macro forces, starting to get external point of view from experts, interviews of thought leaders and so forth, academia, even competitive activity. And then finally, internal perspective. There's a general consensus on a number of things that will be certain over the coming years. And then there's areas that are much more uncertain. And so how do those start to coalesce around plausible scenarios? And finally, we start to discuss implications, preparedness, and activation opportunities for P&G around these scenarios. The final thing I mentioned around the scenario work is that they're meant to be plausible and provocative views of the future. They're meant to magnify change that's happening today and challenge our assumptions about tomorrow.
And I'm imagining, of course, we've just come out of like a pretty uncertain time the last couple of years, and certainly COVID dramatically shifted the way that commerce was, experienced by both, brands and consumers. So I'm guessing that played a huge role into this. So I think, it turned, from what I understand, is there were 4 scenarios that really sort of came out of all of this work that you guys did. So what are the 4 major themes that you sort of imagined in these scenarios that both brands and consumers would be expecting, if not in the next year, but going forward even beyond that?
Yeah. So the four main areas that we touched on were named Ruled by Algorithms, 15-Minute City, The Experiential Store, and Land of 1,000 Retailers, or Land of 1,000 Brands. So just quickly, touching on each of these, Ruled by Algorithms, this is a scenario that's assuming that retailers are consolidating and that the world is becoming much more transactional, right? And so the role of the retail environment has changed to be kind of, they're still around, but probably with dramatically smaller footprints. They're carrying only the essential top-selling SKUs. And most of the store is actually being used as a fulfillment center for click and collect and delivery and last mile delivery and those sort of things. And so under this rule by algorithms scenario, shopping has become highly automated. The AI and data-driven analytics and personalization is really driving shopping. And the computer, let's call it, is doing a lot of the work for the consumer. So the role of the physical store is really implying that convenience is critical. Shopping will go on autopilot. There's going to be as I mentioned, a consolidation of retail, but this also means there's going to be a consolidation of data. And the idea of brand loyalty is likely, or at least as we know it today, is likely going to be at risk or dramatically go away. So that's the first one. The second area is around the experiential store. So this is still in a consolidated environment where retailers are consolidating, but the store becomes much more experiential. So as you can see, this scenario is quite different from the previous, and that's by design, right? We're not trying to predict the future. We're trying to, come up with plausible scenarios. And so this experiential store scenario is really in a world of one-click access. The distribution of products has all but ceased to be the issue, right? Anything can be shipped to anyone, anywhere. And the lines between digital and physical are ceasing to exist. And so the question of where the sale actually takes place is moot. Winning retailers in this environment will be essentially animating their physical presence and experience and trying to, kind of move the hearts and minds of the consumer. And so, the big impact of this is like experience is critical. So if you're going into a store, things like personalization, white glove service, virtual try-ons, you know, really robust, personalized sort of experiences, and even online to offline virtual shopping environments will dominate this mega concept of the experiential store. So you can imagine some of the buzzy stuff like the metaverse reimagining retail.
Yeah.
Cool. And then, so, quickly on the other two, there's the 15-minute study. This is quite different from the other scenarios in that it's assuming that retail continues to become more and more fragmented versus consolidating. And under this fragmented environment, there is still a transactional component. So, in this world, the retail landscape has become, fragmented with dozens, if not hundreds of players. Some of the bigger players have historically in this scenario ignored the shifting preferences of their consumers, and it has left room for competition to come in. So new types of marketplace, creator-led brands, independent retailers that are entering the scene. And so, the implications of this are, people will be shopping local. They'll, the small independents will be really focusing on digital and how they show up online. On-demand delivery platforms will become more and more vertically integrated marketplaces. We're already seeing signals for this around companies like GoPuff, for example. And then, convenience is going to be a really critical component of this.
Yep.
And so the final scenario, and I know we're spending a lot of time on this, but this is the meat of what we what we went through, is the land of 1,000 retailers. And so this is a fragmented environment, just like the last scenario, but the focus is much more experiential, whereas the last one was a bit more transactional. And so this is really leaning into creator-led, technology-enabled, social type commerce experience. Yeah. It's going to lead to the democratization of retail. Once niche sellers have access to data and audiences, and they're going to monetize those audiences with really amazing types of experiences. And so, data is going to play a big role of this, but it's going to be democratized. And manufacturing, brands and coming up with new brands is going to become much more flexible and fluid as content creators and influencers launch their own brands, for example. And so, the impact of this is pretty profound on brand building because it's implying that there will be potentially, thousands of new brands that coincide with the thousands of new retailers. And last thing I'll mention here is actually the definition of a retailer will change under this scenario. The content, the influencer themselves may become the retailer, if that makes sense.
Yeah, I think we're starting to see that, certainly. I think already at this point in some ways. Was there anything, that surprised you from what you guys uncovered? I mean, one thing that I actually thought was really interesting, unless I misread this, was the idea of, there were the two things about the store, the idea of becoming a store being more immersive and experiential, as opposed to just a point to just go purchase something. And then that idea of the white glove approach, which to me sort of harkened back to something from the past of that kind of service that one would have necessarily certainly have expected maybe 50 years ago. You would go into a shop and have that, we've all seen the photos of people with literally white gloves, shopping. But I loved these ideas, and I thought this is interesting, these kind of that especially coming back into a store environment. I mean, do you think those are ways, are you already seeing brands adopting that to kind of get consumers back into stores?
Absolutely. Yeah, it's definitely going to be one of the ways that brands and retailers, for that matter, bring consumers back to their stores. I mean, personalization is important to consumers and just as important in store as it is online, right? So a lot of the last 5 years or so in the tech world, we've been focusing on online personalization. That transitioning to the in-store environment and creating kind of a seamless, personalized experience is going to be critical. Customer support, customer service is inherent to that. Shopping is inherently a social activity. I think we're going to see more retailers incorporating more social aspects into the shopping experience. We're already seeing this with Whole Foods doing wine bars to get consumers into the store and spend more time. There's a number of grocers around the country that allow you to, grab a beer and shop, that sort of thing.
Mm.
And so, that's sort of value add, making shopping even more and more enjoyable is another thing that's going to bring consumers back into the store.
How do you think P&G and others can actually use these scenarios and these insights to inform how they're going to kind of move forward in the future? Do they work as much for a giant corporation as they would for a very small independent store? So can both of them pull from these insights?
Great questions. The first one around implications to the brand builder. These scenarios touch on a number of major areas. One is traditional channels evolving, sales channels, and the types of customers that they're targeting. The behaviors of those customers are evolving very quickly, and so understanding those changes is really critical. The technologies that are powering sort of the future of commerce, it's going to be critical for brands, maybe not to become technologists per se, but they need to understand the power that these technologies can provide. They need to understand the sort of, let's call it on-ramps into these new technologies that brands can exploit, and start to learn about how emerging technology can be leveraged to build brands in new ways. It's going to extend all the way to, product innovation as well. How is the product packed? How is the product actually shipped and used in home? These scenarios imply, product innovation as well. And then the final piece I'll highlight, there's a number of areas. One is, that I really focus on is what are some of the key partnerships that need to be formed to really, first off, start to learn about, the evolution of the future of commerce, but potentially down the line, who are the new set of scaling partners under these types of scenarios? Obviously, existing retailers are going to be an important partner, but are there emerging startups globally that the business could be partnering with to learn and then potentially scale? Does this apply to equally to large, multi-brand versus the corner store? It absolutely could, because one of the underlying driving forces that we alluded to in the scenarios was, is the retail world going to consolidate or continue to become more and more fragmented? Under the scenario of fragmentation, the sort of small hyper-local corner store becomes more and more powerful. And so, those type of scenarios raise a big opportunity for that sort of hyper-local, traditionally offline shopping experience to move online and touch consumers in an interesting new way. So I think a number of these scenarios absolutely favor the small. The others where there is consolidation will require adaptation to the small corner store, right? And getting access to data, getting access to the consumer outside of just that physical presence is going to be challenging under some of those scenarios. So it kind of depends on which way it heads.
Thanks so much for joining us. Really appreciate it. I'm sure we're going to hear a lot more from you guys in Pilot 44 going forward. So thanks again.
Yeah, thanks for having me. Appreciate it.